Facilities Committee meeting for the School District of Waukesha. Today is Monday, June 10th, 2024. Can I get a verification that the meeting was properly posted?
Yes, it was.
Great. We are now at the opportunity of our meeting for public comment. Do we have any?
We have none.
Great, thank you. All right, moving into our action items for this meeting. The first action item is the approval of minutes. Mr. Juan.
I move we approve the Finance Facilities Committee meeting minutes of Tuesday, May 7th, 2024.
I'll second that.
And before we go, I just want to make sure that Mr. Zenobia is excused for tonight. So I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, passes 4-0. Our next action item is the approval of the vouchers. Did we have any questions?
We did not have any this month.
Good, end of the school year, all went swimmingly well? Okay. So I'd be looking then for a motion for the vouchers.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Passes 4-0. Our third action item for this evening is the STEM Charter Agreement.
Yeah, Jim and Dan, if you want to come up. Our STEM principals are here tonight to discuss the renewal of the STEM Charter Agreement, which is attached in your packet for you. So I thought it'd be best for you to hear about STEM from the STEM leadership. And then we have a similar approval coming up next with the Achieve Charter Agreements as well. So I'll turn it over to you gentlemen.
Good evening, everybody. Jim and I are excited to be here to it's a celebration every time we get to renew one of these contracts. Get an opportunity to look back at what's happened for us over the course of the last 14 years. Next year will be our 15th version of Waukesha STEM Academy. It's really exciting. Over the last 5 years, we've had an opportunity to really enhance the district curriculum adoptions that have taken place in mathematics, next year in literacy, and previously in writing, and figure out how do we STEMify those for our students. We do really truly want to offer something that's different, but different in a positive way, where we're not ignoring the foundations and the fundamentals of what's good for all students, being able to read, write, do mathematics, so that they can choose any STEM endeavor that they'd like to go into if they choose to go into STEM. So we've spent the last few months as a principal team reviewing our previous contract, making some adjustments. The biggest adjustments have been with the building moves here to Blair for the district, and of course, for the STEM Elementary going to its new building as well. We passed this contract on to the state of Wisconsin, and their representatives, they've handed it back to us with only one recommendation for a change. We've shifted that, and now we're seeking signatures and approval to send this to the state.
Great, any questions? And just bear with me because I still cannot get in to see.
You want my laptop?
I reviewed them both earlier, but. So you mentioned that they asked for one thing to be changed. What was that?
Yeah, they asked for a little bit of clarification around seats and availability for students with IEPs, and make sure that we reference that we're following all state and school district policies. So we put that tagline in, and we added even further for clarification.
Dr. Piasek?
That segues really nicely into my question, but before I ask my question, I just want to acknowledge and celebrate all the great work that you are all doing with your staff and leadership teams and what the students are doing, which is incredible. I mean, it's always been incredible, but you just keep raising the bar, and what I see elementary students doing, I think maybe I didn't do, and even in high school, several decades ago, but it's just very impressive, and I think other districts, look and see all of that and are a bit in awe of what we do. So thank you for that. Very impressive.
Thank you.
And I see, I think for some of us, it feels like chaos, right? How can you design and develop in all that chaos? But that's kind of the norm. Like if you're going to invent, you're going to have stuff all over the place. And so it's, and I'm not saying you're messy. I'm just saying like there's a method to the madness, right? So with regard to district and state regulation and policy, and then the STEM governing board, can you explain a little bit how, I think, as per the contract, the governing board has some oversight, if not all oversight, to curriculum. So how does that work? How does that tie out with district level curriculum? And where does that one supersede the other?
So whenever there's a new curriculum rolled out or being piloted or adopted, I guess, in the end, correct, right? We work with Jen. In the past, it's been Jody. At least from our standpoint at Saratoga, and we'll always talk to her and essentially review our program model, our mission, our vision, and ensure that it's in alignment with that. It's a little tougher at our site because we're competency-based, so we're not age-based. So there's no course in our, or class in our school that's based on age or born on date. And students move at a competency-based rate, so based on readiness levels. So, for instance, if the district adopts like a 6th grade literacy or 7th grade math or 8th grade social studies, our classes are heterogeneous. So there may be like a 6th, a 7th, and an 8th grader sitting right next to each other. And they are given feedback based on a continuum, that's learning targets essentially, but it's 5th through 12th grade, if that makes sense. So we've worked with C&I throughout the entire process whenever there's a new curriculum. We've written a lot of ours, but we always look at professionals like McGraw-Hill and other companies as well that come through with reps. We do use a lot of the district curriculum as well, though. And back when Rachel Herman was here and then Jody as well, we always were in conversations of if we use something, we have to use it with fidelity. And if we're not going to do that, then we don't use it because it's a district budget item. And so we do use quite a bit of district utilities, but we don't use all of them compared to Horning, Butler, and Les Paul. So that's always, we vet it. We work with our science team, our math team, our literacy teams, so.
Are there cases where you may be purchasing curriculum above and beyond what the district has purchased?
At times, yeah, but it's more so digital. Science we do online. We use CPUP, and we've used other programs that Rachel has piloted, or the science department, has piloted and used. But then we'll go above and beyond and supplement it. So a lot of times the district curriculum will supplement what we're doing with such a hands-on. You pointed out like the hands-on, the messiness. Mm-hmm. In a project-based learning setting, it's tough to go strictly with a one-to-one curriculum basis, and so we don't use the curriculum to supplant our program model, but to supplement it in a competency-based model.
Thank you.
Mr. Wad?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, echoing Dr. Piasek's comments, thank you for all you're doing. It's been really awesome to learn about STEM more as I've become involved in the board, and what you're doing is great, and the kids obviously are really thriving in that environment. So this also kind of dovetails off the previous questions. I want to focus more just on understanding better the governance structure of STEM.
Sure.
The role of the board, how it's selected, and its and how that decision-making process just works generally. Could you kind of give me just a maybe 10,000-foot view of the governing structure?
Yeah.
As it actually operates at STEM?
Yeah, so we're under the public umbrella of the District of Waukesha. Our governing board then, so the school board supersedes our board. Our board is not in charge of hiring or firing or training or anything like that. They're in charge of governance. And so what that entails is if we bring in something, to Dr. Piasek's question about curriculum or projects, field trips, anything like that, we'll always present it to the board. If there's things like the contract, we'll present it to our board. Just to say we're going to go to the school board or FNF to present something because we feel it's in the best interest of our students and our parents and our community. So they're not blindsided by it, right? And all of a sudden something changes. Like we put in a code of conduct last year. And if students hit a certain number of elements in that code of conduct, we had to sit down with their parents about, is this the right environment? And then we sent that in to the district because we have to send it to the state. So our governing board's job is to look at things like helping us with fundraisers, helping us with our mission and vision alignment, making sure our charter's in alignment with the state DPI contract. Things that all entail sort of the governing of our school, but not necessarily the inner workings, the day-to-days, the hiring, like I said, things like that. So they're all volunteer. They vet the candidates. It's a board of 9. We have a quorum meeting every month on Wednesday, first Wednesday.
Yeah, and who selects the board? How are they elected or selected, and do they have terms? How does
Yeah, it mirrors the school board. So it's through, Wisconsin DPI has an association called WORCS, WRCCS, that runs a training, but they've put together, so Barry Golden used to be in DPI, who oversaw the charters, the initiation of charters, the implementation, and the sustainability of them. And so there's charter bylaws we have to follow. So from our initial, which this is based on, it set the components of what our board needed to be, what the terms are, the length, when somebody steps down, having a president, having a past and what do you call it there?
President-elect.
President-elect, thank you. And so it mirrors the school board, actually. It's very cool.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
Uh-huh.
Any other questions? Okay. This is set for an action item tonight, so I would be looking for a motion if there's no further discussion.
Move to approve the STEM charter contract as presented.
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Tanya, it passes 4-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep it up.
Thanks.
All right, our next action item is eAchieve Elementary and Secondary Charter Agreements.
Yeah, and Principal Jason Smith is here tonight, and there's, as you just mentioned, there's 2 eAchieve agreements, so we thought we'd roll them all into one motion, but I'll turn it over to Jason to kind of provide you a little background. And then, actually, maybe I'll lead with this. I have, the board, or the committee had asked for kind of a financial analysis of eAchieve. And I was going to put that as a discussion item tonight, but I thought you'd probably want to see it before you approve a new 5-year agreement for that information. So we just put the finishing touches on this afternoon. So included in this is resident enrollment and then open enrollment, and then broken down by full-time and part-time. And I should probably start by saying that eAchieve is one of the harder groups to cost out because there's a constant churn of kids in and out. So you don't lock in one date and extrapolate it because there's a constant motion of kids. But so I started out thinking, well, I'll calculate the number of enrollment revenue, resident enrollment revenue. But then I said, we're already capturing that in our pupil count. So I looked at this as what is eAchieve bringing to SDW in terms of additional revenue besides the roughly $11,000 that we get per pupil. And the bulk of our non-resident kids who come to us are via open enrollment, and count for this year $8,618. Some of them are special ed students. You get a little more money, but for this analysis, I thought this was a close enough measure because I was really looking at, are we breaking even? And these numbers are coming out. We went through a similar process pre-COVID. I can't remember, maybe 6 years ago, just to kind of, oh, actually it was probably part of the last charter agreement being approved. So, and then there's the part-time open enrollment students, which is very fluid, and they can take 1 or 2 classes. We have partnership agreements. We also have per course amounts. So I used the per course amount and said, 70% of the kids are going to complete the course. And with all that said, I came out with open enrollment revenue being brought in through eAchieve at $4.6 million. The expense side is very easy because it's our staff. It's just like building a budget for anything else. And we budget just over $4 million for this current fiscal year. So with that said, the question I was asked 5 years ago, I remember, was, is this a financially viable program? And by looking at this analysis, I can say yes, it definitely is. And then I didn't run it off, but there's another document in board docs that shows the history of charter schools, the number of charter schools in the state. Actually, I thought it was pretty nice. I got that off of DPI. I should give credit to where we found that document. And so I ran just some comparison data, just pulling a couple of things, comparing the number of virtual schools. And now I use 1920, right before COVID, as my benchmark year. There was 48 virtual schools in the state, and now this year there's 62, almost a 30% increase. Enrollment definitely spiked with COVID, but 1920 statewide there was 8,696 kids. It went over, if I recall right, 13,000 during COVID, and then, as we all would expect, it kind of dropped. But this year, or the last year of data they had, it was still holding at 12,929 students. So there was some, I don't know if that's permanent growth at this point, but it didn't drop back to pre-COVID levels. So there's definitely more competition out there, though, but there's also appears to be more kids. One thing I would say about that chart is when it says students, as I looked into this myself, is it students or FTE? If I take one class, am I 1 or am I 1.2? So how do you calculate that? But, and then if I only take a full-time class one semester, I think they count you as 1 FTE, even though you didn't go the whole year as a full. So it gets to be very, as Jason and I were working through, it gets to be very hard to cost. But you can see the trend lines. I think that's the most important thing to take from that other chart. So that's the information I just wanted to bring to your attention, and I'll turn it over to Jason to walk you through any chart, and then we're both here to answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Webb?
Yeah, can I just follow up real quick?
Sure.
Do we have any comparative numbers from previous years to see the difference between revenue and expense, to see what that trend is pre-COVID?
I would think we'd be able to pull previous years as well.
It might be interesting. I mean, I intend to talk a little bit more about this later, but I mean, it's clear that we are seeing a decline now on an annual basis, even compared to pre-COVID. And I'm just wondering what its implications are from a budgeting perspective and what we might want to think about as we move into the next budgeting cycle.
Sure, I'll make a note of that.
Thank you.
And I would call out just taking a look at the presentation as it's sitting here. So as of the numbers you gave us for this last year, we're sitting at a margin of about 13%. That assumes, as of right now, that we've got 6% of the overall market share, which is a decline. And I talked to Mr. Smith briefly before the meeting started, just to understand kind of the landscape of looking at a population of online learning in different pieces versus a charter. And the obvious call out for me was McFarland, which has 25% of the market right now, but that's a national level. It's not apples to apples. But I do think there is value in understanding what the trends were pre-COVID. Now, COVID introduced us into a national online learning, so we knew that the enrollment was going to come down. But to build on that then leads into the marketing question that I keep asking. And as a district, what is the goal for us as marketing? Are we marketing to build and expand? And how are we planning to market? And if the intent is to grow, how are we going to do that, as well as understanding how the costs associated with that? So I think there's a lot here, and I know that tonight's discussion is really to approve all of the great work and continuing that you've done from a contractual procedure, but like from a finance standpoint, our heads just kind of explode with watching what the data says and then how are we going to react to that with determination? Are we either going to try to capture more and grow with it? And if so, how are we going to do that? And how does that play out into really what we're looking at from a budget standpoint and then a strategic 3 to 5 year outlook, right? Which for eAchieve, I think is a targetable approach. For the brick and mortar, a 3 to 5 year plan is really hard to do just because of the variables that go with that. Rightfully so. So probably a little bit more information before I turn the floor over to you, but just kind of sharing what it looks like now. To answer, it is profitable, at least based on this last year's number, which it probably was further profitable pre-COVID.
So there's a lot, it's a lot there to respond to. And as you said, if we could, if we approve and move forward for 5 years, there's all kinds of ideas that we have in terms of, the discussion about where do we situate in this landscape of 60 plus competitors? Some that are doing things that would be questionable in terms of how they're operating. And that's another conversation for another day. You have some of these programs that are starting and trying to keep it small to retain their kids in their district, which we can respect. We have a feeling that some of those are not going to last long just because of the challenge of running a virtual charter school. And then are you looking to attract lots of kids like we are, or you're just looking to maintain your own students? So we think that might change in a few years. And just changing landscape a little bit in terms of who's looking for virtual charter schools. So we have a lot of ideas about how we can, approach that. What we're also trying to do is work with not only our DPI consultant, but work with the Wisconsin Charter Schools Resource Center in Tomahawk. And we're looking at co-sponsoring it would be like a professional conference next year for virtual charter school teachers. There's a lot of schools that are coming on board that are learning, and we want to help try to grow practice, but we also want to try to help families find the right fit. Because what happens a lot is we get kids in and out, as you can imagine, and I'm not sure how, if you know this, I apologize, but we may get 400 kids in and out during a school year. And so that's another variable in Darren's metrics, is that how do you account for a teacher who may have had a student for 4 months and then another student is onboarded and even a third student onboarded. And so how do you account for them as one? In any event, we want to try to help families find the right fit, because we think if we can get kids in here, if we can get kids and families to achieve and they want our model and they succeed, they stay. The last 2 years, we've had data that says 70% of our kids stay. That's retention data that we never had before. It was 50% pre-COVID, and now we're over 70. And I think that's a celebration, even though the total may seem a little bit like we're maybe inching down a little bit, but collectively, I think that's significant, because we don't have kids leaving and we don't have them trying to find another place, and they're succeeding. So I think that's something to think about as well. But would love to continue the conversation about where we go from there in terms of a 3 to 5 year plan. I love that idea. In terms of our charter, similar to what Jim and Dan talked about, we worked through a couple of revisions with DPI. I had one meeting a few weeks ago. We went back and forth with revisions, and then had one online meeting where we worked through the last piece, and they approved. They had a couple of questions, some things that had to rework on how kids access their technology. We just needed to make sure we were following state statutes and change the language a little bit, but it was fine. We had to do a little bit of work on explaining governance board, and then a little bit of work on just making sure we had our language around how we accept students. So once we cleaned that part up, they accepted and approved, and we're good to go. So lots of celebrations. I won't give you all the details, but the most recent was we graduated 200 kids on Saturday at South High School, and it was great. It was just a wonderful ceremony, and really exciting and happy to be part of it. So looking forward to a chance to renew and continue the good work together. And like Darren said, we have 2 charters. Elementary, 4K through 5 is one charter, and 612 eAchieve Academy is the second charter. And they're very similar, just a little bit of language in terms of programming that is different based on the grade levels.
Mr. Wad?
Thank you. So I know, we're already talking about wanting to do maybe a deeper dive into some of the trends that you're seeing within the school, but just a couple of high-level things I'm curious about as I was looking at the data, and I think we maybe even chatted about this briefly last year when you had come in to talk about EH and what's going on there. So I'm just curious, do we have, well, let me back up to something you talked about that caught my ear and I maybe didn't realize. So you had said it's not unusual to have students come in and leave, after even just a couple, 3 months. Do we know, are they typically going to a different virtual school, or is there some temporary need they have for virtual learning before they can be back in a brick and mortar classroom? Some combination? Can you kind of help me understand that a little
Sure.
bit better?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of, really, there's two pieces. There's the families and students that come to us and they decide, like you said, they wanted to, there was a health issue, there was a traveling issue, and they decide they want to go back. For some, they find that it isn't working for their student, and they're not making progress, they're not getting an education, so they decide to withdraw and go find another fit. They might be at another virtual charter school, it might be at a private school, it might be at their local school, but they withdraw based on this just isn't working out at home. And then there's a third category of the students that we have to send back to the resident district due to non-participation. And that's part of the state statutes, and it's part of the work we have to do, and it's the most difficult, some of the most difficult work we have to do is because we know that over half of those students that we send back don't land anywhere. And while that's not it's a real ethical issue, right? We know that many of them won't wind up anywhere, but we can't let them stay and not get a good education. So we have a lot of discussion about making those decisions. But those are really kind of the three areas. Does that answer the question?
It does. I just kind of wanted to understand the dynamics behind some of that. So one of the things I'm wondering about is I have looked at this list of, what I would maybe classify as our competition or just other people in that space. Are there some schools that tend to specialize in specific types of preparation? So, and what made me ask this was, I had noticed one virtual school that's growing and seems to be growing pretty rapidly, the Rural Virtual Academy. Is there some sort of a focus that they have that might differ from programming that we offer other schools? And the other one that caught my eye was Destination Career Academy. And that made me wonder, is that more vocational focused or trades focused? Can you just kind of help me understand a little bit better if that's the case? And then maybe I'll ask the follow-up already. Do we have something that we specifically want to focus on and market ourselves as for those that are looking for different virtual options?
I think the question you asked is a great one. And yes, I think there are some options, some things we're doing already, but I think there's more we can do there. I can't speak to destinations. I hear good things about them. I never hear anything from kids that come to us from them, anything negative. So I don't want to say anything other than I think they do a good job. And I know they talk about a career, but I don't know if that's just sort of their motto, other than that they do anything specific to that. But again, I don't want to speak to that. I certainly could do a little work and find out. Rural Virtual is interesting because they operate as a big consortium. They're out of Medford, and they've kind of culled the market in the western and northern part of the state. And they're working with a lot of smaller rural schools and creating some partnerships to provide classes where those schools maybe can't. And they have just, and with that, I know some of the folks there, they do a really good job educating kids. And they've built a lot of those partnerships, and I think it's working well for them. And I think they've just decided that part of the market is something that makes sense for them through that rural virtual market and through that consortium. They also work a little bit through the state e-learning network, if I recall correctly, and that's a whole nother layer to access to resources. If you access those resources, you're part of that network. It can keep some costs down in terms of what you're accessing, but you're also locked into doing what these other models are doing. So you lose a little bit of that local control and autonomy to program the way you want to. But we are really interested to know how what they're doing from a marketing perspective. I talked to them at some of the conferences. We do some professional things together, but they certainly are doing a good job in terms of attracting students. So we'd like to know what they're doing.
And that's kind of where I was going next was, might be I'd be interested to know if we've done any sort of, or planning on doing any sort of research on what these other schools are doing, to see whether or not, you know, is there something they're doing that could help us maybe stem the decline that we're seeing in our enrollment trend? Do we need to specialize more in order to attract specific types of students? What I found interesting was most of the schools on here kind of follow the same trend as us. They had, you know, and the ones that maybe grew a little bit and then had a big spike during COVID, and now they've returned back and they're on a kind of a slow trend down. But these were a few of the schools that popped out at me. I think we talked about McFarland last year. These three in McFarland seem to be the only schools that are bucking the trend of what the other 50-plus school districts are seeing, and it would be very interesting, I think, for us to understand better. And are they actually cutting into students that might otherwise choose eAchieve? And if so, what is it that's the differentiating factor? And is there something we can do to maybe win some of those students back? Because clearly, as we've seen, this is a bit of a profit center for us, right? It has a significant impact, and I think, you know, if there are 12,000 some hundred kids that are looking for virtual education, I think anything we can do to capture more of them only helps our entire district in terms of our financials and opportunities that not only we can provide to the eAchieve students, but the ones in our buildings here in SDW. So
and not to go too deep into this, but I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us doing additional marketing to students and families with IEPs. We have an outstanding special education staff. We were asked to be part of a doctoral study. We were one of only 5 charter schools that had, and I don't know exactly the data offhand, but we had some data as a charter school and only 5 other charter schools the state had, and there was interest in finding out what we did. So I think from that standpoint, and also from attending some of these marketing conferences that we did, we were talking a little bit before, there's an awful lot of demand for students with IEPs to have a place to go virtually after the start of the year. And unfortunately, every virtual charter closes after September 5th or something. So if we can figure out that as an option, I think there's a real possibility. And also just marketing that without marketing the opportunity for kids with IEPs to have success, and that we're really good at serving those students, I think is a tremendous opportunity for us. So, yeah, thank you.
Before, I just wanted to highlight, Mr. Sips, something else that you had shared with me as it relates to McFarland, just from their marketing nationally versus locally. And so the population of students that they're targeting is not just Southeast Wisconsin or Wisconsin, it's at a broader level, which I think helps explain what we're seeing in a trend. But to your point, how do we understand what that is and maybe apply it internally? Dr. Piasek?
I have a question related to what you handed out, Darren, and I'm just curious how or does at all the district students taking like a one-off elective through eAchieve, how does that show up in the financial analysis?
The revenue, as I mentioned earlier, the revenue's already baked in with the count, right? They're captured in the third Friday count. The expenditures are also baked into the wages and the benefits because we budget that some amount of kids are going to continue to take classes, so or extra classes via the high school. So we bake that into when we develop the expense budget. So I can't tell you, I'm sure it varies year to year, I can't tell you what that extra cost may be, but I don't believe it's enough that we're adding staff above and beyond more than likely what we'd have already.
I think it's a significant benefit to our students that probably doesn't get closed loop accounted. Not that that's not appropriate, it's just that we see, to your point, we see their accounts on the brick and mortar high school side. And I know there are some AP courses or some off-schedule courses that students are able to take through eAchieve. I think the way the eAchieve releases work in high school provide a ton of flexibility for the kids, especially those students who are maybe advanced on a certain track or want to take a language or a level of language that isn't, there's not a class that's big enough to support it. I think the quality of those classes just continues to improve too. But if I'm looking at this correctly, the operational cost to execute the courses are captured. But what's not captured, which probably makes the business case even stronger, is the fact that there's not a revenue line because we've already got those students accounted for someplace else, but we're able to provide services for our students in our brick and mortar classrooms that they wouldn't otherwise have access to. So it's almost parallel to me to some of the dual enrollment opportunities, and yet we're not effectively directly paying for those. So I think that's a huge advantage. I'm also curious if we do or if we've ever considered offering those kinds of courses as one-offs within other districts. If there's an AP Computer Science, can somebody from KM or Pewaukee enroll for that one course, and then there's a revenue transfer for that, or?
Yeah, those are the part-timers that are
Those are the
accounted for.
individuals
They
we're
can
talking about.
take up to 2 part-time classes.
Okay. And does that also apply to homeschool students? I know we allow them to take courses within the district.
Yes.
I thought, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We have had conversations over the years about, because we have, for open enrollment students, or homeless, we have a flat rate, standard rate for a class, but then we also have a partnership class rate for, and we've talked, and it wasn't just COVID, I think we've talked about it probably 2 or 3 times over the last 7 or 8 years of seeing if districts want to, kind of the consortium you were talking about earlier is, we have the infrastructure here, why would you recreate it yourself? And then obviously during COVID, we had a lot of those conversations. I don't know if maybe Diane was part of one of those conversations, but it was fast and furious because districts were just dying to find a solution to the virtual. And I don't think any of those ever came to any sort of fruition. We kind of structured it like we do the Montessori agreement where we get to count the kids and then we pay them a set amount and we get essentially like 15% off the top for admin. And that's what we had envisioned, and we really had momentum with a couple smaller, especially K-8 districts. I remember talking to them. And I think just there's a core belief that you don't want to give up your kids. And I think if I had to guess, that's what killed those conversations. So we have tried to build, because like you said, Kelly, it offers so many different opportunities to not only our students, but for some of these unique classes, it's the only way you'll have them.
I have one other kind of related question, and that's what is done or whether there's been discussion about what could be done about eAchieve students participating in athletics.
That one I don't have much information on.
That was 4 years ago now. I think that the legislature and DPI ruled that that was not going to happen. And as far as I know, it's never come on my radar that it's even a discussion item. Homeschool students can, but virtual charter school students can't.
Under any circumstances, or even through like some sort of a co-op agreement?
Correct.
Okay.
Not at all. We've never broached the subject of could eAchieve have their own volleyball team or golf team.
I know in 2020, the concern was that there would be this big mix-up of who was playing on what teams, and so there's a lot of rules about transfer and eligibility and all that, and I think that was pretty messy during COVID, but it sounds like nothing's really changed with that.
And I don't want to wade too far in waters I don't know, but I think part of the concern is just the oversight of the virtual charters. As you can imagine, with 60 plus now, we just had a meeting with the virtual charter school leaders a month or so ago, and there's a lot of discussion about what's happening with some of the new charters, not fully understanding even the state statutes, not trying to not follow them, but just not knowing how to follow them in terms of attendance. And so if you play that out to, we're going to allow those students to play sports, I think there's concern that you could have some real unethical things happening for kids not attending school but just practicing. So I think that was part of the driver, but it's also a little frustrating because we know there's a lot of families and kids that would benefit and enjoy that. So and it's not, we're not quite clear on why it's a homeschool versus virtual charter school. That was never made clear. So again, I don't know much more about it than that.
Any other discussion? Okay, so these are set as a action item. Two separate agreements I think we can cover with one motion.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say no. All right, Tani passes 4-0.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you. All right, our next action item is the express swim contract.
Yeah, we discussed this last month, and the committee asked for some additional information in terms of primarily our operating costs for the pool. So the document South Pool data is, but we came back, and I had Chad and Kyle over at the service building just kind of do what they consider a normal year of maintenance on the pool, from daily checks to weekly checks. And then there's some annual events, annual cleanings, those types of things. And we came up with, towards the bottom is the chemicals and everything. And I said, well, give me 5 years of data. And then as I looked at the data, I remembered some of the events that we've gone through. In 2020, when COVID hit, we completely shut down the South Pool and did maintenance on the deck and regrouting everything and really from top to bottom. So that's why I think that year for chemicals, because we had to bring the pool back up at that point, was much more expensive. So the $87,000 off to the right, I took the 4 years above it. And then in '22, I believe we had the mechanical room flood. So I think that's probably why some of those dollars are slightly higher. But I think around that 87,000, looking at that history is a fair measure of annual chemical costs. And then like the total labor outlined above. Now, not all these costs are tied to us having Express or not having Express. We would host the state swim meet either way. So don't tie, these aren't added on costs because of Express, but I thought I'd give you the complete picture. So we came up with about almost $178,000 of annual costs tied to the maintenance of the South Pool. And then the proposed average annual lease payment, if it goes the 5 years, is $113,955. So hopefully that answers some of the questions you had related to our costs. The one thing I can't provide you is utility costs. We don't have separate meters on the pools. It's tied to a larger section of the building, so to give any estimate for that would have been somewhat of a guess, I guess. So, so keep that in mind too, that there is that. But again, those utility costs, more than likely, the vast majority of them are there with or without Express Swim.
Okay, so the recommendation for the negotiation is roughly a 6.2% increase from existing contract to the proposed contract.
I didn't do the
Yeah, it is, I did.
percentage basis, but yes.
Okay,
The other change that we have is we're increasing the amount of the rent or lease payments that would go into our maintenance fund for the pool, which we have used. We previously currently code 38% of the lease revenue to go into that fund, and we would increase that to 50% moving forward. And that's really a district decision. I think the maintenance is always there with the pool, so we think that's a good move.
That pool maintenance fund is for all.
It's never been handled that way. It's always been a South Pool. All the other maintenance, for the other two pools, we've just funded with district dollars. It doesn't really call it out in the contract. That's just our past practice has been that.
So this is just for South then? What you
It doesn't
showed.
say that specifically in the contract,
No.
is what you're saying.
That's just how it's been, practice has been that, but there's nothing.
No, but I
that-
mean, the data that you've,
Oh, yes, yep.
okay. So if the proposed annual lease payment average is about 114,000, average expense is 178,000. So basically, if I'm looking at this right, is Express covering about 64% of the expenses then? Just by the revenue they generate?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, 63.4%.
Do we know approximately how much of the pool usage is through activities run or sponsored by Express?
I don't have that information, no,
Just curious.
yeah.
I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but I guess I'll ask one question. One thing that struck me for whatever reason was the pool chemistry checks, that like once in the morning, once in the afternoon. I mean, I don't know a lot about pool maintenance, but it just seems like a lot.
I believe that's all called out because it's a public pool.
Correct.
There's a whole, it's like any regulations. If you're a
Okay.
Public entity.
Pretty simple step. We'd have to do it whether they're there or not, but
Yeah, I'm just thinking, once a day, once every other day, is that good enough? And that would, cut some costs anyway, but,
Not if you want a
it's a
green
regulation.
pool.
yeah, well, that's what I'm wondering, like, okay.
Any other comments or questions?
So, does Express function exclusively at South? Do they do anything at West or North?
No, there's lessons at West as well,
Okay.
and under, trying to think of the name. It's not under Express, Swim America, thank you.
I apologize if it's in the contract, I didn't see it. Is there any guarantee of the amount of time or usage or specific days or times of usage that are in the contract? I mean,
I think the only language I can think of off the top of my head is, we make allotments during the swim season that our teams, at the prime time.
so should the district ever lose a pool at one of the other high schools, would the contract as it exists now make it more difficult to absorb any of the things that are going on at our current schools that are not south, to be absorbed within the district as a result of anything that we may have guaranteed or does the question make sense?
Yep, yeah, and just to answer your first question, in paragraph 1, sub A, it talks about the swimming, but it's all around our teams having access. We did have that conversation, again, it ultimately depend on how the co-ops would end up being structured. But we also talked about Special Olympics, so if you look in paragraph 3, that's a new reference that we added as part of the conversations we had earlier about the third pool. So they're confident that we could continue to operate with the 2 pools based on the level of participation that's going on right now. So we did cover that. And then keep in mind, this contract has a maximum of 5 years, but the last 2 years are mutually agreed upon. So it's a 3-year with 2 one-year adds.
With each party having the option of Or is it all on us, or?
I don't believe it's all on us.
I know it was like a 1-year notice, though, right?
Yep. Some year, I'd like to do all these contracts, so all these language items are in the same.
Same.
Yeah.
Per
Yeah.
contract? Someday. Yeah, unless either party gives written notice.
Okay.
It's paragraph 2. I thought it was further down.
And then just kind of the final question, from a budgeting standpoint, does this kind of fit with what, is this kind of where you expected us to land when you were mapping out the budget for 24, 25, and?
This is where we thought we'd fall. A lot of improvements have been made at the pool, so we think overall maintenance costs are down. I think we're more, with the newer equipment that's in there now, will be more efficient as well.
Okay.
So we weren't anticipating a significant increase in this lease.
Okay, I don't see any further discussion. This is set as an action item. Be looking for a motion to approve the express swim agreement as presented.
Also move.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Tanya passes 4-0. Okay, we are now moving into the discussion or information items for this evening. The first discussion item is the monthly budget report.
Yes, I've put a few things out there for you. Just want to bring a few things to your attention. The investment report includes interest that we are still making on our investments at the banks in excess of 5%. That hasn't changed, continues to stay steady there. The tax levy, we received another payment this past May. We'll receive another in June, one more in July from City of Waukesha, but then August, of course, will be our large influx again in the fall to satisfy the levy from the 23-24 school year. And when I looked at the budget a little bit more in detail this month, there were two things that I wanted to bring to your attention. Number one, you'll notice on May 23-24, the non-capital objects, you'll see a credit there, or a negative. That was actually the movement of the Verkada cameras and security from a non-capital to capital object. So that was a journal entry that we completed for that. And also, we're running in that 78 to 80% year-to-date of budget for our salaries and benefits, which is what we expect to see at this time of year as well. If there's any questions, I can certainly do my best to answer them or get you an answer.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Is there any other questions or discussion items? Okay, thank you.
I would just like to comment on the MPS,
Oh,
just briefly.
okay.
For people who, I know you've probably gotten questions, and I've gotten a few questions myself about recent news reports about Milwaukee Public Schools and their reporting to DPI. And it was mentioned several times it impacts every district in the state potentially, and it is true. And we actually went through this process last year, if you recall. We had a budget levy increase that we were kind of targeting, and then on October 15th, when state aid is certified, there was an $850-some thousand aid adjustment, unannounced, unpredicted, or unpredictable. And that went back to correcting something to do. I'm not going to pretend I can speak to exactly what happened prior, but to adjust and correct MPS's aid. And we all get aid from a pool of money, so as the correction gave them more, it took money from us and several of the districts around us. And that's my fear for what's happening now is, first of all, how many fiscal years are we talking? If it's 2 years of corrections, there could be a significant aid impact. Next week, or 2 weeks from now, DPI will come out with their July 1 aid estimate for all school districts, and they base that off of your budget information, because they don't have your actual expenditures yet. I don't know how Milwaukee's faring, budget versus actuals. I'm not going to pretend I do. So I think we might get a very, hopefully it's accurate number, but it might be a very generic number if there's this big correction looming out there for MPS that's going to come in fall. If it's like last year, we won't get any notification, and if we lose a lot of aid, we're going to see, it's an inverse relationship with the local property tax levy. So I just want people to know, we're dealing with the best information that's available today. We'll know a little more in a couple of weeks with the July 1 estimate, but there'll still be this issue out there. And it's not like you can use last year's adjustment, because it's very unlikely it's going to be the same number, because it's different factors. But we'll try our best to keep the board and the community, if there's something to add at our budget hearing in September, we'll provide that information at that time. But going forward, just to map out our next steps overall, the July 1 aid estimate will come. We'll use that data, and maybe if we know a little more about where our actuals will come in, we'll fine tune that a little. In August, we'll bring forward the preliminary budget and tax levy for this committee, and then eventually the board to approve to go to the board, to the budget hearing in September, where we do our presentation. It's a chance for community members to provide feedback. And then the big dates after that is the third Friday pupil count in September. October 1, we'll learn valuation changes, and then October 15th is when that aid number comes in, and 2 weeks after that, this committee and then the board is going to be asked to approve the final budget and tax levy. And during that time, Heather and I have learned a lot about budget development. This is our first budget together, so it's actually been good, because a new set of eyes looking at things is often helpful, and we'll be continuing to update the budget as we go forward. So I just want to make sure I didn't forget to mention the MPS is part of our budget report tonight.
Mr. Webb?
Yes, thank you. So Darren, you and I chatted a bit about this offline earlier today. As I mentioned to you, several people saw a newspaper article that talked about the fact that the referendum that was passed for MPS, that $272 million referendum that we've heard so much about, actually impacts all other districts in the state as well. So as a result of them passing that, it also has an impact on the budgets of all other school districts. Can you kind of explain how that works? I mean, I had people say, how in the world can a decision by Milwaukee to tax their own residents lead to us getting less money? Or we weren't listed as one of the districts impacted, though I'm sure we are, maybe just to a lesser extent than the ones that were listed. But I want to say, I think I saw Elmbrook on there maybe, and I don't remember some of the other ones I saw. But people were confused and concerned. Number one, how can that happen? And B, what might the impact to Waukesha School District be as a result of that referendum passing?
Yeah, it all goes to shared costs and what districts are actually expending. All of our expenditures, we're all required to report out our expenditures every fall for the prior year. And then the cost per pupil or shared costs as part of the aid is a real driver in the calculation, because the more you spend, you're seen as being a more wealthy district. And there's other factors like property valuation and such, but it's possible with that they're not a negative aided school district. The more they spend, they don't necessarily get less aid like we do. We're kind of a break-even district right now, but so with them just being able to spend that much more money on an annual basis is a significant, I mean, I don't know how many school districts in the state, you could probably add all their budgets together and not get to 272 million. So it's a sizable amount. So as they spend more in that shared cost relationship between, let's say it was just MPS and us, there's only two districts in the state, they could pull aid away from us. Now, the impact of that referendum will happen the following year because it's always based on the previous year's expenditures.
So we'll see that in 25, 26?
Correct.
Will it be obvious to us what the impact is? Is it quantifiable, or could it be quantifiable?
I think you could get at it. It takes some legwork because you have 426 school districts out there, all passing referendums, and some are positively aided, some are negatively aided, but you might be able to get a kind of a rough guesstimate. You could pull MPS's equalization aid formula and just go in and take out 250 million in shared costs and rerun it. But how that gets distributed across the state, then that'd be the hard part to really figure out.
Okay. So, in a nutshell, because they're spending more, the state, because they do a certain amount of matching aid, the amount that they match with goes up because they're spending more. And since there's a limited pool of state aid, the additional money spent at MPS and state aid decreases the pool for the rest of the schools in the state. That is
Yep.
it in a crux. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's exactly what we went through last fall.
And that was but that was a result of a accounting error.
Right.
This would be actually a result of the passage of that referendum.
Correct.
Which is why it would be not just in the interest of the residents of the Milwaukee Public School System to find out and get those finances cleaned up as quickly as possible, but it truly impacts everybody in the state.
Yeah. And I think what'll even, as I say you're thinking about, what'll even make it muddier to figure out the true impact of that referendum is you might have these corrections overlapping. So you might have two variables all going on at one time, which would make it, to draw it down just to the referendum would be probably pretty tough, but you don't know. I mean, I don't know what they've not reported. I don't know, I mean, are they still working on 22, 23 reporting, or is it, it's just hard to know until a little more information comes out.
Just a question, and you can treat it as rhetorical if you like, but do you suppose if we were, how many months behind? 8 or 9 months behind in our reporting, that DPI would not be asking us before those 8 or 9 months are up to get them corrected, and perhaps even making it publicly known that there are reporting issues from our district?
It makes you wonder.
Does the surface of perception of misappropriation of spending, we shall see how this turns out in the future. And leading into those that manage their finances well, the next discussion item is the draft 2024-2025 preliminary budget.
Yeah, because we don't have a scheduled meeting in July, Heather and I agreed that we would just start rolling out some financial data, and what you have is a report that is the 100, 200s, which is salaries and benefits, object codes. So you can just see some of the legwork that it is underway and has been underway. And we hope to have more information in July, and we'll probably send it out via a Friday update or something. We just want to get you some information before walking in with a booklet on August, whatever date our meeting is, and say, well, here's the almost $200 million budget that we'd like you to take a look at. So this is the bulk of it. We'll continue to tweak it as we go through the grants that are coming and going, and the staffing plan, the final staffing plan that'll come down. We are making reducing some FTE of staff, but we're also, more importantly, shifting more towards special ed, as we did last year, to meet the needs of our students that are out there right now. So hopefully this is enough to give you something to look at. If you have questions, again, this is kind of our first draft, and we'll be looking at it ourselves over the next few weeks, over and over again, more than likely.
I do have a question as we roll to the final. And I think just because Mr. Watt had, the reality and clarification of the points that he brought up, I think they need to be heard loud as to there's a large bogey kind of sitting on our heads right now as we come into this, that the impact that would have from a general fund to be able to navigate this as well as the tax levy. We should be bringing and raising the flag a little bit more on how this impacts each and every one of the students that we serve. And how do we, if we can, Mr. Clark, I think Mr. Wadd's fair point was, if there is a way with the two pieces to have, I've got a referendum as well as a financial, I don't even know what words to say for what they need to do to fix what they have not fixed. But to know what the impact of those are, we should have some type of way to say we need to present this. And I don't know what that means right now, but I don't want to lose sight right now or in the next few months of probably a potential very, very big variance one way or the other.
With that topic, you could have a swing. It could actually benefit us this year, but the correction
We-
can
yeah.
come in year two and.
Yeah.
Right, we just don't know, and I think that point is, as we start talking through these, it's, I can't predict the future, but I can at least have a plan in place to say if, and I think over the next, I think with even just the next month, we're gonna have better insights as to what is happening, so that we can try to predict and plan for what that's worth. Mr. Watt?
Yeah, to follow up on that, so I'm assuming that prior to, and I think it was in one of the slides, I don't know, no. So that nearly $800,000 correction impacted us, was it in the 23, 24?
Yeah, we got our certification in October of '23.
Right. So we found out that came out of, we had no idea that was coming, right? Okay, so now all of this stuff has made the news. Is there anything that we can do to basically insist that, and is it DPI, is it the legislature? Keep us abreast of where this is and try to estimate for us, like, what the potential impact is and when we'll feel it.
Yeah.
So that if we get more money this year than we would anticipate, I would think we would want to consider, maybe banking that or some portion of that to help offset whatever
Sweet.
pain gets inflicted if there is a significant financial reporting correction that will hit in a future year.
Just keep in mind, and with the revenue limit, though, if we get less aid, our revenue limit's still the revenue limit calculation. Let's say it's $100 million, just for round numbers.
Right.
If aid should have been 60% aid and 20% or 40% levy, and we get a little extra, I'm still playing with the pool of pool of money.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So that would have to be on us to decide whether or not we wanted to levy it where the number would have been had, so that we don't have to increase the levy as much the next year to make up for the,
Right.
if,
That's what the point is.
right.
Right, so the pool and managing the revenue versus the operating expenses, now you're asking me for the mistakes of somebody else, I have to pick up, and our taxpayers have to bear the burden to fix. Our students are the ones that are paying the price.
The one caveat I'd add to that, though, that makes us a little different is we have that defeasance. And I think if we play that defeasance correctly with our Fund 39 levy, maybe we can smooth that out, assuming it's just a 2-year
Yeah.
thing. But that's one thing that we will need to be thinking about is what levy do I bring forward for the preliminary? I normally have done a conservative one, so you can come back in fall. So that's kind of the art of the preliminary budget. You don't have a firm count. Do we come in with a few percent higher or 2% higher than we think it is going to be, just to cushion a possible MPS? that we're just gonna have to, because we have to bring something to the budget hearing, right? But we'll see where those numbers come in and, but again, that, I think that defeasance might help us smooth out the edges on this whole topic. Yeah.
So you're saying just, we would pay it off not as quickly for whatever time to try to offset the impact of MPS?
It's kind of what we did last year.
Yeah.
We
slowed.
adjusted the defeasance by a small amount so that we could absorb the,
Yeah.
the 850 at the end.
Yeah, that final defeasance number, I won't know until October 16th. When you get that aid and you bring all these levies together and you go, okay, what's the acceptable levy or what's the target? And I kind of have a feel of where we want to end up, so, but it's a great tool to have. Problem is, the more defeasance you use, you might be setting yourself up for a larger increase to, so, but we'll figure it out. It's better to have options.
I mean, we're in a place where because it's the biennial budget, we know what the per pupil amount is. We just did the enrollment study, so we have a good idea about what we expect to see in terms of enrollment, although that's still kind of tricky, right? Because there's external forces that we can't necessarily control. But I would say it's better to start with a more conservative approach that
Yeah.
may reflect a small increase than to project something, based on arbitrary numbers that's flat or down when we don't have that aid information. Because it could be because of the lagging year on aid that we see something that's to our advantage, taxpayers' advantage this year.
Yep.
But we won't know that until we get there. And if we do, then we can work with the remaining defeasance to try to just keep it balanced, right?
Yep. Because we have about $6 million to fees, if I remember, 6 million something. So we have some, but again, you really have to look out that additional year. But in terms of the revenue limit for next year, I know right now very closely what that revenue limit's going to be, because even if you get a swing, the non-recurring exemptions, not to get way into the weeds here, the non-recurring exemptions in the revenue limit kind of hold you harmless for 1 year. So I know pretty close with that number.
Okay.
Even if I'm off 50 kids, that first year I'll know within a pretty tight window what that number's going to be. So we'll keep you posted.
Thank you. Good stuff. All right, moving into our other business, are there recommendations for future committee meetings? Okay, seeing none, we do have a need to go into executive session. If somebody could read us in the motion.
I'll do it. Whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Oh, whoops, I'm sorry, I read the wrong paragraph, didn't I? So I want to adjourn to executive session pursuant to that. Oh, I read,
You read
You
it
were-
right.
I read the right one. You did.
We're good. So
okay,
just
I'm sorry,
second.
that's my motion. I won't divide it, I promise.
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved and second. Could you take the roll call?